Hi, it's Brian. Welcome to the Awards Contender, and it's time for my first ever Q&A video. Some really fun questions came in. Let's start with number one, what's my favorite movie? I'm not sure I've talked about this on the channel before, but my favorite film of all time is Sunset Boulevard, directed by Billy Wilder from 1950. I first discovered this movie in high school, and I fell in love with it so much that I rented it from the video store, watched it in the afternoon, and then when it finished, I drove to Best Buy, found it on DVD, and I bought it. And I came home and I watched it again. That's how much I loved Sunset Boulevard, discovering it in high school, and I've probably watched it another 40 to 50 times since. This is an ultimate comfort movie for me, and it's also a masterpiece. I do think Sunset Boulevard is the prime example of a perfect movie. I love the story, the actors, the look of the movie, the production design, the score. There's not a wasted moment in that movie, and Gloria Swanson's performance is just impeccable. I love it so much. I've now seen Sunset Boulevard at least 5 times, I would say, in a theater, and that includes in 2022, when I flew down to LA to see a screening of Sunset Boulevard with the one and only Nancy Olsen in person. I got to meet a living cast member from Sunset Boulevard. She's in her 90s now, and it was such a thrill. I adore this movie with my whole heart, and if you've never seen it, put it at the top of your watch list. Sunset Boulevard. What was the first film I remember seeing in a theater? Now, if you're counting drive-ins for this question, it's actually the first memory I have ever. I'm 3 or 4 years old. I'm in the back of a car with my friend Brandon, and we're at the drive-in movies to see a screening of Cinderella. I guess they must have brought it out in 87 or 88 or something, and so it was playing on the big screen, and I have a very vague memory of looking out the car window to see some of Cinderella. So that movie meant a lot to me when I was a kid. In terms of like an actual movie theater, I think it was The Little Mermaid in the fall of 1989. I was born in 84, and so I probably saw some movies in theaters in 88, early 89, but I do clearly remember seeing The Little Mermaid in a packed theater and just being enchanted with that story, that movie, and it was really fun to grow up with that Disney Renaissance era, Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and The Lion King. Like, I was at the perfect age for those movies. And starting with The Little Mermaid, I was having a total blast. What fostered my love of movies early on? So from since I can remember, I have been in love with stories. Like, I was a voracious reader growing up. In like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, I always had a book in my hand. There are pictures of me as a kid, like out with friends, and I'm holding a book. Like, I was just always reading. I was obsessed with stories. And that, of course, extended to movies. I would have to thank my dad for fostering my love of cinema from an early age. He was taking me to films all the time. He wasn't into like serious dramas or foreign films, stuff like that I would come to appreciate later. What my dad got me into when I was 7, 8, 9 years old was horror films. He liked to show me the scary stuff, and that included R-rated content. Like, before I was 10 years old, I had seen most of the classic R-rated horror films, including Halloween and A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Evil Dead. I have a funny story about watching The Evil Dead for the first time. I was around 8 or 9, and my dad and I watched it in the living room, and near the end of the movie, I was so grossed out, I left the room, threw up in the bathroom, and then immediately came back to finish the movie. I loved it. It was just a little bit too intense for young Brian, and I had to excuse myself. And I do think a lot of my passion for cinema in the 90s stemmed from him. What movie made me fall in love with movies? Now, there is one particular film that got me truly obsessed with cinema, and that was Jurassic Park. Like, I really enjoyed the Disney animated films in the early 90s. I was seeing some dramas. I remember My Girl from 1991 had a profound effect on me. I think that was the first movie I saw where I really recognized what death was. Macaulay Culkin dying in that movie. Like, I had a lot of questions for my parents driving home. And there were things I liked in 92 and early 93. But oh boy, I was 8 years old when Jurassic Park came out. And this was early on when I wasn't even aware really of what trailers were. When I went with my dad opening weekend in June of 93 to Jurassic Park, I knew almost nothing. I had seen Hook, Steven Spielberg's previous movie. I might have known that it was the same director. I knew who directors were by 93. But I hadn't seen like a still image, a trailer. I just knew it was a dinosaur movie. I was not prepared for how intense Jurassic Park was going to be. The T-Rex attack, like halfway through the movie, it was so scary for 8-year-old me that I turned around and looked out at the audience because I couldn't watch the screen anymore. That's how scared I was by that sequence in Jurassic Park. But walking out of that movie, I was in awe. I had never seen a film like that. I don't think anybody had seen a movie like Jurassic Park. And I went back over and over again. I saw Jurassic Park in the theater 5 times that summer. It was like every 2 to 3 weeks, I'd go back and see it again with my friends, with family. I just adored that film to such an extent. And it was the first movie I saw where I recognized, like, oh, this is a craft. There is an artistry to filmmaking I hadn't really noticed before Jurassic Park. And so that's always been a very important movie for me that I continue to revisit all the time to this day. What was the first adult-themed film I saw in a theater? So I'm going to take this question as meaning R-rated. As I talked about before, I was seeing R-rated horror films at home as early as like age 7 or 8. The first R-rated movie I saw in a theater was True Lies in July of 1994. I was up in Lake Tahoe for a vacation, and my dad was obsessed with Schwarzenegger action films. And so even though my mom was like, do not take him to this movie, he did it anyway, and I just loved every second of True Lies. I feel like that was a good first R-rated movie for the theater because it's not overly intense. It has like 3 F words. There's the Jamie Lee Curtis dance, but it's more silly than anything else. She doesn't get completely naked. My dad was sweating bullets in that Curtis scene where she's like dancing. He was like, oh my God. But yeah, that was great. I love True Lies. I've seen that movie now at least 20 or 30 times. Whenever it's on TV, I'll watch it. I really, really enjoy that one. And then I saw Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme later that year. I think it was a September release. And I remember it opens with a sex scene with nudity. And for that one, both of my parents came with me, and I still remember my mom doing this during the sex scene. It was like, Craig, oh my God, I can't believe you allowed Brian to come to this. And he was like, I didn't know it had a sex scene. Anyway, one other quick story I'll tell you that's really funny. It happened 5 years later. I really wanted to see Eyes Wide Shut in the theater. And even though I was much older by then, I was 14 at the time, my mom was like, I have read up on this movie. You cannot take Brian to that one. And it was a long back and forth. For a couple of days, finally, my dad took me to see Eyes Wide Shut. We watched it. I loved it. I still love it. We walk out of the theater that day in July of 99. My dad looks at me and says, if your mother ever sees that movie, I'm a dead man. Who would I cast as my parents in a biopic? I didn't have to think too long about this one. When it comes to my dad, it would be Tom Hanks. I think my dad has always kind of looked like Tom Hanks. He acts like him. He's soft-spoken, very kind. Usually I can watch a Tom Hanks movie and not really think of my dad, but there was one where it was kind of distracting, and that was Captain Phillips from 2013. Tom Hanks in that movie, with the haircut he has and the goatee, looked just like my dad that year. And I was like, it's like I'm watching my dad in this movie right now. It was kind of crazy. So I would pick Tom Hanks for my father, and for my mother, I would choose Diane Lane. I think my mom is one of the most beautiful creatures. She is so gorgeous, and she's always had kind of a Diane Lane vibe, I would say, about her. She's also really kind and loving, goes out of her way to help others. And so, yeah, I would cast Diane Lane as my mom. What was the first Oscar telecast I watched? So I'm pretty sure up until 1993, I was not aware of the Oscars. I have no memory of watching the show in like 1990, 91, 92. I was like, did I tune in for the years that a Disney animated movie was in some categories, like Beauty and the Beast or Aladdin? I don't think so. The first ceremony I watched, for sure, was in early 1994. That was the night Schindler's List won Best Picture and Steven Spielberg won Best Director. That was a very important Oscar telecast for me. Like, I recognized that night all of these great films I didn't really know much about, and I wanted to seek out in a way as a growing film fan. And like seeing Tom Hanks win Best Actor for Philadelphia, I had seen him in Big and A League of Their Own. And I'm like, oh, he's in this like serious drama where he's playing a dying person and he won Best Actor. I wonder what that movie's like. I want to check it out. The big thing from that night was I really recognized what directing is and how you could do totally different things as a filmmaker, because I was excited to see my favorite film at the time, Jurassic Park, win 3 prizes. But then I'm like, oh, but Steven Spielberg, who made Jurassic Park, isn't nominated in director for that movie. He's nominated for this other film, a black and white epic that I hadn't seen yet. My parents did not take me to Schindler's List when I was like 8 years old, but I wanted to see it at some point anyway, and I think I rented it in 94 or 95. And so it taught me a little bit about what directors do and the variety of the stories they can tell. And it was also just this celebration of movies I really vibed to. And I remember the following year asking my mom, like, when did the Oscars come back? When did those happen? It wasn't until the year of Titanic that I started seeking out all the nominated films and performances. I wasn't fully obsessed with the Oscars until about 1998. But as early as 1994, I was watching the show and really falling in love with it. What's my biggest frustration with the Oscar community? Honestly, when it comes to the Oscars, my biggest frustration has always been, since the 90s, how poorly the Academy looks on horror films, on scary movies, how they are always, year to year, pushed aside. It's why I celebrate when the occasional genre film breaks through, like Get Out, and The Silence of the Lambs, and The Exorcist. It doesn't happen very much, but I would say that's the most frustrating thing, how they look down on certain genres, including comedies and other things. I don't want them to start giving Best Picture prizes to movies that don't deserve it. Like, I don't want to see mediocre genre films suddenly represented at the Oscars in picture and acting and things. But when a great performance comes along, like Toni Collette in Hereditary, I do feel like that deserves more attention. And so in the years to come, I would love to see the Academy give a little bit more attention to horror films in technical categories, in acting categories, and Best Picture. I do think this genre deserves to be there. What made me do the awards contender full-time and give up my other job? So I'm not going to go into the reasons why I necessarily left my other job. I was a teacher. Basically, I wasn't very happy, and I felt like something was missing in my life. I didn't feel like that was my calling, basically. And since I was a kid, I have been obsessed with movies. I went to film school. Like, I made short films. I was an editor for many years. I worked in casting for a while. I've done a lot of things in my life. And what was really neat was in 2021, I thought about, like, could I do a YouTube channel? Could I do something that incorporates all of my talents, all of my interests, all the years I've been a writer, an editor, all the years I have been totally immersed in film, culture, history, the Oscars. It just kind of made sense. It was a long time coming. I spent many years doing other things, like not even related to film necessarily. And then I did a podcast for a few years called Film at 50, and that allowed me to dip my toe in that arena for a bit. And then I started this YouTube channel at the end of 2021, and I fell in love. I just loved it. I loved everything about it. Even recording, which has always been hard for me, I have to admit. Like, this part where I'm talking into a mic and looking at this camera has always been a little difficult for me. I'm happy when this part is over and I can just start editing the video. That's where I soar. That's where I'm like really, really having fun. This part's a little bit awkward for me, but I'm trying to get better at it. I keep practicing, obviously. Throughout 2022, it was a hobby that I worked on after hours, when I wasn't teaching, when I wasn't working. And so I only had time to make about one video a week for a long time. And when it got to early 2023, the channel was continuing to do better and better. I was getting more subscribers. I was always thinking about this YouTube channel. And teaching, after a while, was coming seconds. Like, I would be at work thinking about my next two videos, about what I needed to research, who I needed to interview, or whatever. And so in the spring of 2023, I made the call, like, you know what, Brian, let's go after our bliss. Let's go after something that I truly love to do. You know, I'm close to turning 40, and I thought, okay, do I want to spend my 40s doing a job that has its perks, that I do like aspects of, but I don't fully love? Or I could spend my 40s doing a job that I adore with my whole heart, and I decided to make the jump. And as of this recording, I have been full-time on YouTube for almost a year, and I have had just the greatest time. It has been a total thrill, and I can't wait to see what the next years doing this job have in store. Have I ever worked in the film industry? Yes, I have. As I mentioned in the last answer I gave, I went to film school in Los Angeles. I went to Loyola Marymount Film School from 03 to 07. And when I graduated, I started working various production assistant jobs for about 6 months. I would just like go work for a day here, a week there, mostly television stuff. And then there was a friend of a friend of a friend situation that got me a job at Dr. 90210, the reality show about plastic surgery on E! I worked there for about a year as a PA. I also worked a little bit in the writing department. And I've always loved actors and the casting process. I made a lot of short films in high school and college, more than 20, I'd say. I loved working with actors, so I started looking for casting jobs, and it took a couple months, but I eventually got a position with an independent casting director named Valerie McCaffrey, who cast Babe and American History X and Hard Candy, and I worked closely with her in her office for about 2 years, and we cast a bunch of things you've probably never heard of, like Last Call and Rush Lights, and Oren Peli's Area 51, his follow-up to Paranormal Activity. Probably the most famous movie I worked on, or I should say infamous, is the Oogie Loves in the Big Balloon Adventure. This horrible movie that is a notorious bomb. I spent 3 to 4 months working on that thing, and yeah, it kind of went nowhere. I enjoyed the process of auditioning actors. Many of the actors I auditioned back in 09, 2010 have gone on to be big deals. I remember auditioning Rooney Mara for a film, Rushlights. This was around the spring of 2009, and I remember in the room going, this actress is amazing. Like, somebody cast her in something, and then a few years later, she's an Oscar nominee for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And I was like, yes, awesome. But so yeah, I worked in casting for a while. That job came to an end, and then I looked at other casting opportunities, and there were a couple short things I did. But by 2012, I wasn't feeling LA anymore. I wasn't feeling the industry. And so I came back home to Reno to get my master's degree in English. And that's a story for another day. But basically, yeah, I worked in the film industry for a few years, worked a lot of different jobs. And while there were some good times, I'm happy with the choice I made to leave LA and the industry. Have I written a screenplay? Yes, I have written probably between 8 and 10 feature-length scripts throughout my life. A couple of them were in high school, and they were awful. Like, I don't even want to look at those again. But I wrote a couple in college and after college. I had a couple scripts place in different competitions. It can be confusing when you're in your 20s writing scripts, not sure how to get funding to like make the movie on your own. Or like, do I get an agent? Do I get a manager? How do I get them? Like, how many screenplay competitions should I send my work to? So I kind of fell out of love with screenwriting just as a whole, and I didn't do it for a long time. And then I got my MFA in creative writing at the University of Nevada, Reno. And in the final year of my program, I had to write a short script for a class. And it got me interested in screenwriting again. And over the next year, I wrote 3 more screenplays, one of which got some attention from managers I sent out to LA. I wrote a screenplay, kind of a biopic about the career of Wes Craven that specifically looks at the time of his life when he was a teacher and how he abandoned that job to become a filmmaker and make his first movie, Last House on the Left. The screenplay mostly deals with like the early 70s in Craven's life, but I also have some about Hills Have Eyes and A Nightmare on Elm Street. And it got some attention. Nothing really happened with it. I moved on to some other things. But yeah, I've written a bunch of screenplays, and I've also written 20 novels. I've written 20 books since 2011, something I haven't talked about on the channel, something I don't really go into. You can see some of them on Amazon if you go look. The big one I would say is Happy Birthday to Me, which is a young adult novel about a high school senior who starts aging a whole year of his life with each passing day. That one had some good reviews and some coverage when that book came out. If you want to get a taste of my fiction writing, check out Happy Birthday to Me. What hobbies do I have besides watching movies? So I'm still a big reader. I read all the time. I'm always reading like 4 or 5 books. A couple of them are nonfiction. Some of them are fiction. Kind of depends on my mood. Like sometimes I just want to read a nonfiction book about a movie or something. Other times I'll read like 50, 60 pages of a fantasy book or something. I usually have a book on me. I love to read. I also love exercise. I work out almost every day. I love to take my dogs on long walks and go for hikes. I do some biking here and there. And I love the outdoors, getting outside, going for a long walk or a run or something. I try to do that almost every day. I love to cook and bake. It's probably not good for this, but I do enjoy baking a really rich chocolate chip cheesecake here and there. And I would say I make dinner 3 or 4 nights a week, and I try to experiment different kinds of recipes. I always enjoy that. I am also a golfer. You might have noticed all the golf shirts I wear for the awards contender, like all the different videos I appear in. You'll see a lot of golf shirts. I don't golf like all the time. When I was younger in high school and college, I would usually golf once every other weekend. I would say now it's about once a month. It's not like I'm going every other day. But in the summer, like between June and September, I do get out to the golf course a little more often, maybe twice a month. I've always found the sport to be very relaxing, and so I do enjoy golf a lot. And then, yeah, just spending time with family. I have 2 nephews. I try to see them as much as I can. And so, while a big chunk of my time is the YouTube channel, and recording, and editing, and researching, and watching lots of movies, which I have no complaints. It is my love and my passion. There are other things I do, including, I have failed to mention, travel. I adore traveling to other states, other countries. Every 2 to 3 months, I have to go somewhere. Usually, it's somewhere I've been before, like LA to see friends. But sometimes it's new cities I've never been to in Europe. Like I've been to Europe 3 or 4 times, and I also love to cruise. I have been on 7 cruises in the last 10 years. So that's also a thing I love to do. I do love me very much a travel adventure. What's a movie I'm embarrassed to admit I love? The one that came to mind is not necessarily a film I love today, but I loved it at the time, and for many years, I didn't understand why people hated on it so much. For a long, long time of my life, I loved Speed 2 Cruise Control. I grew up a huge Sandra Bullock fan, and Speed was my favorite movie from 94 to 99. And Speed 2 Cruise Control, like I was so excited that summer for a new Speed movie with Sandra Bullock. And I recognized while watching it, it wasn't in the same league as Speed, but I did also think it was doing its own thing. And so I walked out with rave reviews, and everyone kind of looked at me like, okay, kid, like, get some taste, why don't you? Now, today, I very much recognize the many flaws of Speed 2 Cruise Control. But to be honest, I still have a lot of affection for that movie in my heart. I've never thought it to be a terrible sequel. Like, it has its problems. But I would rather watch Speed 2 Cruise Control over many, hundreds of films, many of which people probably like. So yeah, I would say Speed 2 Cruise Control is not as bad as everyone makes it out to be. And now, the final question for this Q&A video, what's one movie I could watch thousands of times? It's the same answer I had to the first question. My favorite film, Sunset Boulevard, is really the only movie I could see myself watching 1,000 more times and not get sick of it. I feel like everything else I love, including movies in my top 10 list, like The Truman Show and Mulholland Drive, and Misery, and Before Sunset, and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and so many great films I adore. I would get sick of those movies if I had to watch them another 200, 300 times. I could watch Sunset Boulevard once a week for the rest of my life and not get sick of it. I'm serious. Every time I watch Sunset Boulevard, I get something new out of it. I notice something new in the frame, in a line reading, like just absolutely everything about that Billy Wilder film starring William Holden and Gloria Swanson is my jam. I love, with a capital L, Sunset Boulevard. It will always be my favorite film, and I would happily watch it 1,000 more times. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Q&A, and I'd be happy to make another one for you down the road. We'll see you next time.